First thing we want to do, we're going to start out is talk about kind of a model of or pictograph of communication. And this is called the Shannon and Weaver model, because Shannon and Weaver were the names of the two gentlemen who first came up with it, so that's why we call it Shannon and Weaver model. Another name for it is the linear model of communication. And let's see here. There it is. Linear model of, I'm going to have trouble with this though now. There are several parts to the model. The first part is the sender. And what does the sender do?
The source of the message.
The source of the message, right? The sender sends the message. So, the message originates with the sender, but before the sender can send the message, they must first encode it, right? And what does that mean? We know what we mean by encode. And how do you think what you're going to say? Okay. And then after you think, what do? Do what?
How do you think about it, right? Organize it.
Possibly you could write it. What are you doing if you write it?
Organize it.
Organize it. What do? Encode something. We're putting our thoughts into what? Words, okay? Put our thoughts into words or language. And what is language? How do you define a language?
Can be words or non-verbal.
Well, it can be verbal or nonverbal. Well, save that verbal or nonverbal thought for now. We'll do that in just a minute. But what is a language?
Channel of communication.
Okay? It is a way of communicating or a chat. Well, a channel, I don't want to confuse you.
Is
In
it
that
a
one, we
medium?
use that
Is it a medium of form, communication form?
Okay. Well, your book offers in a later chapter a definition of language. We haven't got to that yet. Let me give you my definition of what a language is. A language is an agreed upon, arbitrary set of signs and symbols. An agreed upon, arbitrary set of signs and symbols. So, for example, what is this? No, this object. A table? Can we all agree it's a table? Why?
Because the people before us agreed it was a table.
Okay? Because the people before us agreed it's a table, right? In other words, we all agree to call this a table, so that makes it a table. There is nothing, as my old professor, Dr. Carmichael, would say, there's nothing inherently table about this object. There's no such thing as the essence of tableness. Okay? There's nothing about it that makes it a table, other than we just agree to call it that. We could call it a tuna sandwich, it'd be the same thing, right? Doesn't matter. It's only a table because we agree to call it a table. So that's what we mean when we say language is agreed upon. We all agree to call it that, and it's arbitrary because what? What does arbitrary mean?
It's what was decided upon as, let's say, the table. That's what we decided was arbitrary.
Yeah, we just decided that. There was nothing about it that, like I said, there's no essence of tables. There's nothing about it that makes it a table other than that. So arbitrary means like random, right? Just a random symbol. And Aristotle said that spoken words are symbols for thoughts and written words are symbols for spoken words. The scholar I.A. Richards in the book The Meaning of Meaning talks about meanings are in people, not in words. So what does he mean by that? If meanings are in people, not in words.
That's how the sender delivers the actual words. Shows the impact of the meaning of the actual words, like intonation, like.
Okay. Well, all of that impacts it, but is it really the sender or the receiver that decides the meaning of the word?
The receiver.
Okay. So, if we say a common word like dog, are we all necessarily going to picture exactly the same thing? The same dog?
No.
And the wonderful thing about all of this, in the way we use language, is that no other creature on this planet can use language and communicate in that arbitrary fashion that we do. In other words, I could train my dog to fetch a stick or play with a toy, right? I used to have a dog. Her name was Hope. She passed away, but she was a great dog, and she was a really smart dog. And I could say, "Get your toy. Go get your toy." And she would run over to the little box on the floor over there in the corner where we kept her toys, and she would grab one of her toys and bring it to me, and we'd play. Her favorite game to play was tug of war. She had a little rope with knots in it. She'd bring that, and I'd pull on it, and she'd pull on it, and we'd play tug of war. So she could do that, right? So that's communication, isn't it? But could I say, "Hope, I went to Walmart today and bought you a new toy. It's in a bag on the bed back in my bedroom. Go get it and we'll play with it." Could she do that? No. So human beings are the only ones that can communicate arbitrarily using language. We're the only ones who can talk about an event that has already happened in the past, or an event that hasn't happened yet, or a place where we are, or a place where we've never been, or a place where we used to be. Okay? An object that we have in our hand, or that we've never touched or never seen, or totally and completely abstract concepts like peace, love. Okay? Those things are really abstract concepts. We can communicate about them. No other animal on the planet can encode messages the way that we do and use language arbitrarily the way we do. So after the sender encodes the message, they must send it through the channel, which is what? What does the channel mean?
The way that the message is delivered.
Okay, give me an example of a channel.
Telephone.
Telephone, right?
Radio. TV.
Okay, TV, what else?
Radio.
Radio?
Radio's a channel. Any others?
Computer.
The computer, right? Chat with people on the internet, and email and things like that. How does Dr. Lucas communicate with you? What channel does he use? The book. Boy, this is a smart class. Usually when I ask that, they go, "Who?" So the textbook, right? So he wrote the book that we use for this class, so he's communicating with you through that kind of text. So the channel simply means the way the message gets from the vehicle we use to get the message from the sender to the receiver. That's the channel. And then once the receiver receives the message, they have to do what?
Translate it.
Decode it, right? They have to decode it. And that assumes what? What are we assuming? If I'm going to encode a message and send it to you and you're going to decode it, what am I assuming?
Read it, read it, what do you do? That you understand it.
Did I understand it? Okay. So if I'm decoding in English and you're encoding in Spanish, are we going to have a problem? Quite possibly, right? So it assumes that we can share the same language. That doesn't mean that we can't communicate with somebody who speaks a different language, but it certainly complicates things, right? And we'll talk about the way things get complicated in just a minute. So Shannon and Weaver, by the way, Shannon and Weaver were technicians working for the phone company. Back in the early days of the phone company, they worked for Bell Laboratories, and part of their job was to come up with a model of what happens when people use a telephone, and that's where this model came from. And communication scholars then later took and borrowed from that in order to define communication in a broader sense, or use it to. But Shannon and Weaver were looking at the telephone when they made this model, is what they were thinking about. And what they said was that this process all works pretty well as long as we don't have any noise. And now they were working for the phone company. This was the early days of the phone company, many years ago, before we had fiber optic lines, digital communication channels, and all that stuff. So what kind of noise do you think Shannon and Weaver were talking about when they made this model? Static, right? I guess I may be the only one here who's old enough to remember back in the days when the phones weren't very good. You have to get on there and like I lived in Texas when I was a kid growing up. My grandparents lived in California, so you'd only get to call Grandma once a week and talk for 3 minutes. Long distance calls were very expensive, and a lot of times you'd have to yell, "Hello, can you hear me? You sound like you're in a well." Right? The phone lines weren't very good. There'd be a lot of static, especially on long distance calls. But nowadays they're much better. But if we're going to use this model to define communication in a more general sense or a broader sense, we have to expand that definition, right? We have to talk about noise beyond just static on a phone line. So let's talk about noise.